Hey, I'm Wanderer Boots, and this is my guide to not sucking at Dark Souls. PvP in particular. This first session will be about how to properly build your character with the RPG. I'll separate it into three major sessions: level, build, and sub-archetype. Your level determines who you can match with for a duel, and your character's maximum potential. Your level gives you that many stat points to allocate towards your build. While in most dueling cases it shouldn't matter, as everyone should be striving towards a single level to keep the best balance, the Red Sign Soapstone has a matching lenience of 10% plus 10 levels, scaling from the summoner. So a level 120 can summon 22 levels either way, 10% of his level plus 10. Anyone from level 98 to 142 can be summoned by him. To my knowledge, there are three major soul level brackets for PvP, known as level metas: 80, 120, and 150. These leagues are spaced so that they cannot summon each other. 80 and 150 are minor leagues, and often net less players in comparison to 120. Level 120 is often said to be just right, effectively being the minimum level to make every possible build type in the game perfectly viable. The primary issue that players have with 120 is the dominance of quality builds, but for the most part, players who want to play PvP should aim to have their characters be level 120. 80 is what I would call the fun league. Quality weapons are less prominent as their high investment proves difficult to deal with at such a low level, and so their high damage is balanced by generally lower health, stamina, and defense than its melee-based alternatives, which lends to variety to how one makes a melee build. 150 is a hybrid bracket. It lets users have as much stats as they could possibly ever want, turning all builds into a mash of melee and magic stats. I personally am not a fan of this bracket, as it detracts from the wonder of a well-crafted melee magic hybrid at 80 or 120. Now that that's out of the way, let's make you a character. I'm going to assume you chose the 120 meta, however everything I say here can be applied to all fields of character building, including just going through the game's PvE. First, you'll need to establish what role your character will fill, as either a damage dealer, gouge, or mage. Damage dealers are generally quality or bleed builds, focusing on punish your opponent heavily for the mistakes they make, with massive damage, and are most common at 120. Gouges focus heavily on being able to make a lot of moves and mistakes, making sure to have the stamina, health, and defense to survive an encounter. Mages make sacrifices in their defense and survivability to pack huge damage potential and versatility even at range. As a damage dealer at 120, you have the greatest ability to dominate up close. You have enough stat points to make your weapons absolutely crushing, but also maintain good passive stats. The first rule is never try and get away with less than 35 vigor, and 40 is absolutely recommended. Up to 40, the additional survivability that vigor grants is brilliant, allowing you to get hit and not melt to pieces. And you will get hit. I even like 42 vigor, but that's just personal preference, and is of no benefit to you past 45. Your points are far better put somewhere else. Secondly, you'll need endurance. Stamina is what you need to perform most actions, and you'll surely die without a good supply of it. 40 is the maximum endurance you can have and still receive benefit from, and is strongly recommended. A melee build should never seek to go below 35 endurance at level 120, as most players will have the maximum stamina of 160 or even higher, boosted through use of rings. This will allow them to utterly outmaneuver you. Stamina is crucial, almost as much as health. Third priority are your damage stats, and what defines you as a damage dealer. 40 in strength and 40 dexterity is strongly recommended for a build centered around use of strong weapons that scale in both stats. As you may be able to see, 40 is a bloody good number on any stat, with the only exceptions being attunement and vitality. 40 is far too much of either attunement or vitality at 120. Having a high amount of strength and dexterity is what's known as a quality build, and on almost all standard weapons, those that upgrade with regular Titanite, 40-40 is the best way to get the most damage out of it. As a damage dealer, you don't want to be making large amounts of sacrifices to your damage output. Just remember, being a damage dealer doesn't mean that you use a weapon with a massive attack rating, only that you are getting as much damage as possible out of any weapon that you choose to use. Gouges differ from damage builds in that they give up some damage to instead prioritize other styles of winning encounters. HP regen, heavy armor, above average stamina and health, or support spells. Anything that isn't just damage. While at level 80, this can be just sacrificing damage for superior passive stats, at 120, one must be clever to design their character to not be plainly weaker than a 40-40 quality build. One might try building around faith weapons to permit use of spells such as Soothing Sunlight. Mixed with an offhand blessed weapon, can net 12 HP per second for a short while in HP regen. Or, using very heavy armor and a single stat scaling weapon, like the Moonlight Greatsword, to make use of immense poise. The Havelist is a build that completely does away with the need for damage stats, and instead wields 6 crossbows with a ton of defense. This kind of build is not often recommended at 120, but can be made viable with a carefully mapped plan.
It's so silly. It's just, you know, come on, it's a meme video. Oh, you just... Alright, he thinks it's a fucking joke. He thinks it's a joke. He thinks we're joking. He thinks we're joking. He thinks this is a joke. He legitimately thinks this is a fucking game. Alright.
Mages are likely the simplest build archetype to explain, but easily the hardest to play well. While in the single-player components, magic may be considered cheap, cheesy, or ruining the experience, there is nothing harder than winning a duel against a competent opponent as a caster, assuming all builds are optimized to their fullest. Usually, a strong mage chooses intelligence for their strong complementary weapons, the Moonlight Greatsword and Hazel's Pick. Pyromancers are also strong class choices. A pure cleric is almost impossible to play properly, due to their lack of good pressure option. When making a mage, remember the first rule I ever taught you. The golden rule, one might say. Vigor. There is no exception. No build should have low health. Everyone dies, and that isn't something we want to happen to you. Unfortunately, dedicated intelligence and faith spells don't inflict viable damage until 60 in their respective scaling stat, not 40. This means going above 40 vigor is not an option, and heavy investment into endurance and vitality is not going to happen. You should not put any additional points into vitality at all, because attunement is your dump stat. You'll need at least some attunement. It allows you to carry your powerful spells, and lots of them. I usually aim for 3 to 5 attunement slots, depending on how dedicated I am to my projectiles. On a pyromancy build, one requires a total of 80 faith and intelligence to be effective. Most will choose a 40-40 int faith split, as dark and fire weapons scale with each stat individually, rather than them as a total. Much about your build should be determined by the weapon in your right hand. Your stat, distribution, and playstyle should both cater to its strengths and weaknesses. You should get to know your weapon, and make sure you know how it scales, and how to make it do the most damage possible. Sometimes making it do that much damage isn't exactly viable due to a lack of stat points, but in most circumstances using a weapon raw is absolute garbage, so you should at least try to get some scaling damage out of it. Though a small investment into melee damage stats can go a long way, the small investment you can put into your faith or intelligence to get minor buffs are not worth it. In fact, if the tool you're planning on dealing most of your damage with is not a catalyst, you shouldn't need any spells at all. On offensive magic builds, your spells should be the priority of your caster build, not your weapon. After all, you could just make it do better damage as a warrior. And yes, I do realize the hypocrisy of telling you this just as I smash people around with the Hazel's Pick in Melee. I never said I was a good sorcerer, just that I know how to build them. The only time I can recommend spells on a Melee build is when using a weapon that is already centered around the use of faith, such as the Earthseeker. If you're using the Earthseeker properly, you probably already have 35 to 40 faith. This is perfect for my personal favourite miracle, Soothing Sunlight. It nets you 10 HP per second, which is beautiful, and is well worth having, so long as you have the points for it. Sacred Oath and Deep Protection are so bad, they actually got nerfed for PvP specifically. Against other players, they barely do anything. In PvE they're fine, of course, you can use them in that whatever. As a rule of thumb, don't use buffs unless you really know what you're doing. They usually aren't worth their asking price. The only buffs I can actually recommend centering your build around is weapon buffs. Dark Moonblade, the best of the bunch, is only really effective at 60 faith, but oh my, it is very effective. It's best used on weapons that only scale with one stat, such as heavy or sharp weapons, and on those which have long string combos, such as these Sellsword Twin Blades. Very quickly, we'll go over bleed builds. Bleed builds are a subtype of damage dealer, and focus on inflicting both physical and bleed damage on your opponent. Bleed builds typically aim for 40 luck, 40 dexterity, and at least some strength, often 27. Standard weapons with innate bleed damage are your go-tos. Anything from the Karthus Curve Sword to the Morning Star can be a good choice, as they are all hollow infusible. When properly built, the hollow infusion will increase your luck by 5 points, and increasing luck makes you do more bleed damage. Unfortunately, you will have to be hideous, but you can always use the Untrue Dark Ring to cover yourself up. Use Karthus Rouge to significantly boost the bleed damage of all your weapons. Bleed weapons do slightly less base damage, but all at once inflict massive damage when their bleed finally procs. What you'll want is abilities that complement the strengths of your class. Great Axes benefit lots from a long string of attacks to attract punish attempts, which won't work, because you have a Great Axe and a lot of stamina. It's for this reason that commonly paired with a very heavy weapon is 40 endurance, and the Ring of Favour and Protection. Swinging a great weapon costs a lot of stamina. While swinging a great weapon is often most effective while consuming a lot of stamina very quickly, it is generally best to use light weapons in constant streams of pressure, and as such, the Chloranthy Ring is used to provide a constant supply of stamina that can be used in bursts with very short delay. Of course, if you have the stat points, both 40 Endurance and the Chloranthy Ring make a very effective pairing. But it's ideas like this that you should incorporate into your character design. Don't gimp yourself just because I said to focus on something else. Gimp yourself on magic though, you can probably afford to. If you need a lot of magic though, have a lot of magic, cause like you're a caster and shit, so go ahead, but I meant for warrior builds, don't get magic if you need it. I've just relayed a lot of information about making characters to you. Now we're going to start making a character of your own. I don't expect you to remember everything I've said in the video so far, so feel free to go back and watch other segments, even at a later date if you need it. Use this video as a reference. I'll have links in the description for exact timestamps. Now, let's actually start the character building bit. First, damage dealers. I don't like investing too harshly into a single weapon or playstyle, as I get quickly tired of fighting with just one style. When you're just starting out, however, I recommend you do stick to a single weapon, if at least for a while, just while you learn how to properly wield it and make it effective. Switching your fighting style when you're still new can make the process of getting better a lot tougher. The build I'm showing you can make nearly any weapon perform to the best of its ability, so long as it has no int or faith scaling, and at least a D in both strength and dex. For this generic build, you're going to want to have started as the warrior class. Knight is also acceptable. Any class can make this work, but warrior will give you the most effectiveness. As we're making a 120 build, we'll immediately want to make our Vigor and Endurance 40 and 35. Secondly, we're going to make our Strength and Dexterity both 40. This, as a warrior, will leave us with 9 points, and the Knight with 4. Pump your remaining stats into Endurance. Knights will be left with 39, and warriors can go above 40, but they won't because that's a bad decision. Instead, the remaining 4 points that a warrior has will go into Vitality and Vigor. As previously stated, I like 42 Vigor, but this is really up to you. If you want a little bit more equip load, 15 Vitality is perfectly viable. You might be thinking, oh hey, those 4 points can be put into attunement to get me up to 10, and I can have an attunement slot. That's a stupid idea.